Headed to you for what you can expect. One of those things being to seek the truth for us, and it's time to upgrade from just dipping our toes into now jumping in for the truth. And I've had to come to terms that our country faked the moon landings. And I was one that, I saw the videos. I'd reference Neil Armstrong, the quote that's, it goes like, that's one step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And now, what I'm saying for you is that I'm not saying that you're required to stop believing in it, but I ask you to think about it, and where things don't make sense, be curious and ask questions. So, welcome back to the show. Going to jump into the chat. I'm going to get the chat up here. Excited to be able to go live again with you to get your questions, thoughts, what you disagree with, and what you resonate with. And please continue to share this with friends and family. This is a determined movement, but it's you know, it's no surprise. I think about that. It's no secret that we've been lied to before. COVID being the most recent example that I've talked about that before on the show. But I'll share with you for me where it didn't make sense, and what it really gets into relating to you as a small business owner, and then as someone, if you're someone that supports small businesses, what it gets into is a bigger conversation, and you can think about it specifically in your industry of being able to be curious and ask questions when things don't make sense. Going back to this worldview of power and the rest of us, when you are having an authoritative figure saying something, it's when things don't make sense. Be curious, ask questions. That's one of the main goals for this show for you is to be able to be curious and ask questions when you don't understand something, and to have conversations on topics where we can disagree and then still be able to live in a civil society. It's really important. So for me, with this specifically, I want to get into sharing what did make sense for me. I may make a series out of this. More is just trying to relate this back to you as a small business owner, making sure it can relate back. But let me share with you where it did make sense for me, and you can look this up. You can check it out on your own time. But it's called the Van Allen belts, and they are radiation belts that surround the Earth. And you can look that up. Let's confirm that. And for the temperature measurements, it's been measured to be between 2,000 Kelvin at its lowest temp to then 20,000 Kelvin. So that's something you can also look up for what's the temperature measurements. And then what you can look up now, you look up after that, is then what the main body of the Apollo 11 lunar module was made of. And it was made largely out of aluminum alloy. And what you'll find is when you look it up, and I looked it up here, is what temperature does that melt at? And for me, what I could find was under 1,000 Kelvin. And then the other thing that you can look up is what is the thickness, the distance for these belts. And it's over combined for the outer and inner belt, it's over 30,000 miles. And so you're telling me that all the way back in 1969, that you were able to go through this belt, these radiation belts, go through them for 30,000 miles, go to the moon, land, and then come back through those same radiation belts, the Van Allen belts, go through those, and then come back to Earth. It just doesn't make sense to me. And that was where I had to be curious and ask questions and dive deeper into this. And there are more signs that go back to me having to then come to terms that our country faked the moon landings. But as I said, it gets into a bigger conversation about us being lied to. And even in your specific industry, where things may have just been, they've always been like this, could be something that's said to you It could be you just have to do it this way. Don't make any changes here. And this is where when things don't make sense in your industry, it's being curious and asking questions, and then being able to take the time to look back in your industry and understand the history of your specific industry as a small business owner, because certain changes may have happened recently that now are being shared to you as if they have been there for a long time, and they can't be changed. And it's really important to remember that you have the ability, we have the capability, think of that as small business owners, as supporters of small businesses, to be able to make changes and to work with elected officials to figure out where there's unnecessary government regulation and getting rid of that in your specific industry, and where government involvement is not making any sense, continue to get that out of your industry. Because I go back to America's future is a small business renaissance made possible by free market capitalism. I'm going to get back to that when it comes to free market capitalism. I want to continue to talk about that and the importance of moving towards that direction rather than more government involvement, more unnecessary regulations that lessen competition in an industry. And where I want to go with this is to talk about TARP. So, TARP, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but TARP stands for a Troubled Asset Relief Program. This was created back in 2008. And this was part of the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008. So, what I want to share with you more is what this did as setting a precedence. Because before this program, and what it was it was an authorization of $700 billion to help the financial auto industries, the 700 wasn't, from what I could find, was not used. Not all of it was used. It was less than that, but it was just the authorization. Like how you think about it is like a blank check with minimal oversight. And we as Americans just accepted that of like, we have to do this. And it set a major precedence of when there's a crisis, like when there's a crisis, and we experience that with COVID, we just have no choice but to add a stimulus package in from the government, and that goes back to, well, who's paying that? Is eventually the bill's going to come to the taxpayer, and so there's just no choice. We've got to do this, and that has been what that's caused is, you look at right now where we're at as a country. Think back to 2008 to where we are now. You look at the national debt is over $38 trillion. And I've talked about it before on the show, but debt, we have to address this. There's a lot of different debt. And I'm going to go into auto repossessions here in a little bit and talk to you about that, what's going on this year with auto repossessions because of late payments and defaults with the loans, auto loans. But we've got to we've got to understand what's going on here on a bigger picture, where what this did, because it was the largest peacetime discretionary spending package by the federal government, and it started to set the precedent of just having these massive amounts of money that the blank checks that then have those minimal oversights, and just we don't really know. Let me put it this way: we feel like we have no choice but to do this as Americans. That's what it's sold to us as. And I keep coming back to, we do have choices here. We do have other potential alternatives that we can move forward in. And could it cause more pain? Well, yes. It goes back to, do we have consequences for our actions or not? Because if someone knows that they have no consequences for their actions, they may take on way more risk, may just make way more mistakes, and make it bigger disaster than it had to have been. And maybe there aren't ways for you to have oversight over what you're doing. You can think about that in your specific industries and even in your specific companies, of where there's oversight of, okay, or think about documenting your different strategies and what's working, what's not working, how much data are you able to see. And this is an example that comes up of, okay, where is there unnecessary government involvement when it comes to crises that we're experiencing in the private sector with markets, and the importance also of knowing that there are consequences for our actions, because then we don't have to get into these situations where you've seen it before. People will say, oh, it's too big to fail, so we have to come in and save it, for if it's a company, a sector of the industry. And that can get us into, you think about long term, into trouble. It can, and it can affect on an even bigger scale generations to come. It goes back to what I've talked about before, where younger people, and you think about it, for decades, our futures were sold out. And it's something that we've got to take some more time to have conversations around, of thinking long term. How's this going to affect generations to come for their livelihood, for their quality of life, and not just thinking the short term with these crises. And yes, is it going to cause potentially more pain that we've got to go through? Yes. Well, we've got to continue to figure out ways to minimize that pain, and minimize how long that pain lasts as well. And that goes back to taking accountability for our actions, taking that responsibility on, and changing the narrative, and not just saying, hey, there's going to be no consequences here, but realizing that there's consequences to our actions, and we got to be reminded of that. So I'm going to dive deeper into TARP, and the history over the decades, or over the years, let's put it this way, years, since TARP. But then what I wanted to say was, for over 20 years, the federal government hasn't had a budget surplus. And so this talk of, okay, we want to have more government involvement in different industries, and we want to create more regulations. It does not make sense to me. That does not make sense to me, of give government more involvement in these industries as a good path moving forward for the economy. And what I want to make sure that we come back to is, how do we move more towards a free market capitalism, limited government involvement? Yes, I believe in government involvement to avoid the creation of monopolies, and be able to create more opportunities for competition. But we also have to realize who has a monopoly on power. That's also really important. And I've said it before with the worldview, said it, when you filter it from power and the rest of us, things start to make more sense. And I want us to preserve this freedom that we have to be able to decide how we make a living through capitalism, which includes you owning your small business. And we've got to preserve that. We've gone from ownership and how something to look towards for ownership, especially relating to housing, and then gone into renting and leasing and short-term thinking, where then how much are you going to really care about the place that you're living in, or your surrounding communities, if you're only going to be there for a little while? You know, that's another question to ask yourself. So there's going to be more about this moving forward. It connects. You're going to start to see how these points are all connecting if you haven't already. But now I want to get into auto repossessions, and this is what's been happening this year: is that there have been over 2 million auto repossessions, and it's expected to hit 3 million for estimates by the end of the year. Now, the only other time where it's been to that level of 3 million was back in 2009 after the Great Recession. And so this, I've talked about on the show before, of student loans, credit card debt. You look at how many younger people are using BNPLs, buy now, pay later, for things like groceries. And you look at you look at all these different signs, and what it can point to for high probability is a economic recession. There was talk of, and I haven't shared it too much on this show, I want to get into it more, but like the Main Street labor recession that's happening. So there are these signs that are pointing towards an towards a high probability of an economic recession. And this is where we don't panic, do not panic, be disciplined, realize where can you continue to improve your systems as a small business owner. And then the question to ask yourself here, because I wouldn't be surprised if it starts coming up in conversations throughout media, is, where's there unnecessary government involvement? in your specific industry? Where is there over regulation and burdensome regulation that doesn't make any sense? Because you have to remember, we can make changes here to your specific industry. We have a powerful voice. And it's remembering that, as you know, as a small business owner, there's 33 million small businesses here in the US that employ 45% of the private workforce. And so it is a powerful voice for the supporters of small businesses as well. You have a powerful voice. And so we've got to come together and unite and look at these specific industries and figure out, where does it just not make sense for government involvement? Where is it unnecessary for the regulations to be able to then make changes? And so I'm excited for, and that gives me a lot of hope of change is possible. We've got a lot of work to do and a lot of changes to make, but together, united, we can be able to move forward and quickly figure out what needs to be done, and then start to take action on that. And that gives me a lot of hope. So I'm going to continue moving forward this week, next, what we got tomorrow, and the next few weeks, to continue to connect the dots for you in what's going on in these different industries, because they are interconnected. And going back to what I said, it can be hard sometimes to seek out the truth, and it can be overwhelming at times. And there are moments of not wanting to believe it. And I've been there. I get it. But I also go back to, yes, the truth can be overwhelming. Yes, it can be shocking, and it can give you peace. It's remembering that when you continue to go in your own journey of seeking out the truth. And that's a focus for me with this show, as well as I seek out the truth, is to continue to move forward. And your support with this movement continues to give me the courage to move forward and to share that with you. And so thank you for being a part of this movement, for being here, for supporting this movement. And I'm excited to reconnect again tomorrow with you. See you then.